A racist parent disrupts a classroom by calling the police on a black teacher during her lesson, fabricating shocking accusations. Subscribe and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Mia Watson adjusted the collar of her white blouse and took a deep breath. Another day at St. Mary's Academy. The pristine hallways, filled with the sound of footsteps and laughter, always seemed to carry an undercurrent of tension. She glanced at the clock in the staff lounge, sipping the last of her coffee before heading to her first class. Mia had been teaching at St. Mary's for 3 years, and while she loved her students, the city itself never truly felt like home. St. Mary's was the crown jewel of the small town of Hartford, a bastion of privilege where parents spoke in hushed tones about their children's Ivy League prospects. The school's polished wooden floors and grand chandeliers seemed to echo with the whispers of tradition. Yet, beneath its polished exterior lay a community resistant to change. For Mia, being the first black teacher in the school's history was both a badge of honor and an unbearable weight. She loved teaching English literature, using stories to inspire her students to think critically about the world. But the subtle glances, the quiet gossip in the teacher's lounge, and the occasional outright hostility from parents reminded her daily that she was an outsider. She'd learned to steel herself against it, focusing instead on the students who thrived under her guidance. Walking into her classroom, Mia was greeted by the warm buzz of teenage chatter. Posters of famous writers lined the walls, from Shakespeare to Maya Angelou, each a silent testament to her passion for her subject. She clapped her hands, calling the students to attention. "Good morning, everyone," she began with her usual energy. "Today, we're going to talk about movements that change the world." The class groaned in unison, a reaction she had come to expect, but a few faces lit up with curiosity. Among them was Kimberly Parker, her star student, who sat at the front of the class with her notebook already open. Kimberly was sharp, driven, and unafraid to voice her thoughts, a quality Mia both admired and nurtured. Toward the back of the room sat Adam Harper, a quieter student who always seemed to carry the weight of the world on his shoulders. Mia often noticed his hesitance, as if he were caught between two worlds. As the lesson progressed, Mia introduced her students to the civil rights movement, speaking about Martin Luther King Jr. and Rosa Parks. She asked the class to think about how these figures had challenged injustice and what it meant to stand up for equality. The discussion was lively, with Kimberly leading the charge, her hand shooting up every few minutes with insightful questions. But when Mia posed a question about why inequality persisted in modern times, it was Adam who broke his usual silence. Maybe people just lived better when they stayed in their own communities," he said hesitantly, his voice tinged with uncertainty. The room fell silent, and a few students turned to look at him. Mia maintained her calm demeanor, though her heart sank. She had encountered comments like this before, phrased innocently perhaps, but rooted in deeper prejudices. "That's an interesting perspective, Adam," she said gently, "but let's unpack that a little. Why do you think people feel that way? And does it really make things better?" Adam shrugged, looking down at his desk. "It's just what I've heard." Kimberly turned in her seat to face him, her voice sharp. "Heard from who?" Segregation didn't make things better. It made things worse. If people didn't fight against it, half of us wouldn't even be here. Mia raised a hand, signaling for calm. "Kimberly, let's not attack each other. Adam's point gives us a chance to explore why these ideas persist. The question we need to ask is, how do we challenge them?" The tension eased, but Mia noticed the way Adam avoided Kimberly's gaze. She also noticed the flicker of doubt in his eyes, as if he were grappling with something he couldn't quite articulate. The discussion moved on, but Mia's thoughts lingered on Adam. She had seen students like him before, bright but burdened, caught between the expectations of their families and the broader world. That evening, as Adam sat at the dinner table, his mind was still on the day's lesson. His mother, Joanna Harper, was busy slicing roasted chicken, her movements precise and controlled. Everything about Joanna spoke of order and authority, from her perfectly styled blonde hair to the tailored blouse she wore even at home. "How was school?" she asked, not looking up. "It was fine," Adam muttered, poking at his food. Joanna's eyes narrowed slightly. "Just fine. I heard from Mrs. Dempsey that your class is reading about certain topics, civil rights and all that." Adam hesitated, unsure of how much to say. "Yeah, Miss Watson talked about it today. She asked us why people still think things should be separate." Joanna put down her fork and looked directly at him. "And what did you say?" I just said maybe it was better that way. If people stayed in their own groups." Her lips curled into a faint smile, but there was a coldness in her eyes. "Exactly. That's what I've always said. People are happiest when they stick to their own kind. It's just common sense." Adam felt a pang of discomfort, but said nothing. Joanna continued, her voice growing sharper. "I don't know why they hired her in the first place. St. Mary's used to stand for something. Now they're bringing in people who don't belong, teaching things that go against everything this school was built on." He shifted uncomfortably in his seat, the words from the classroom echoing in his mind. He wanted to say something, to defend Miss Watson, but the weight of his mother's authority was too strong. Instead, he nodded silently, feeling a knot of guilt form in his chest. Meanwhile, Mia sat in her small apartment on the edge of town, grading papers. The day's events replayed in her mind, particularly Adam's comment. She wasn't angry at him. How could she be? It wasn't his fault. She knew that attitudes like his were often inherited, passed down like family heirlooms. Still, it pained her to see how deeply these ideas had taken root, even in someone so young. Looking out the window, she watched as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the town in shadows. Hartford was beautiful in its own way, but to Mia it often felt like a gilded cage. She thought about the students she had reached, the lives she had touched, and reminded herself why she stayed. Change was slow, but it was possible, and she was determined to be part of it, no matter the cost. Tomorrow would be another day, another chance to make a difference. But as she turned off the lights and prepared for bed, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was brewing, something that would test her resolve like never before. The morning sunlight filtered through the lace curtains of Joanna Harper's impeccably decorated living room. The muted tones of cream and beige, accented by gold-framed family portraits, radiated an aura of controlled perfection, much like the woman who presided over the home. Joanna sat at her desk, a steaming cup of black coffee by her side. Her fingers drummed against the polished wood as she stared at her laptop screen, scrolling through the latest email updates from the school board. Mia Watson's lesson had been the talk of the evening among the parents' social circle. As messages pinged back and forth in Joanna's private group chat, the sentiment was clear. Mia's teaching methods were becoming too bold, too disruptive. Joanna, ever the self-proclaimed guardian of tradition, felt it was her duty to act. After all, wasn't it her job to ensure that St. Mary's upheld its values? Her son's words the previous night lingered in her mind. Maybe people just lived better when they stayed in their own communities. The phrase felt like a victory, a testament to her influence. But beneath her satisfaction was a growing resentment toward Mia Watson. That woman, with her progressive ideals and undeniable charisma, was a threat. Joanna could feel it. And threats had to be neutralized. Joanna picked up her phone, her manicured nails clicking against the screen as she dialed the local police station. The voice on the other end greeted her politely, but she wasted no time on pleasantries. "This is Joanna Harper," she began, her tone crisp. "I'm calling about a matter of urgency at St. Mary's Academy. I have reason to believe that one of the teachers, Miss Watson, has been embezzling funds from the school. I've noticed some irregularities in the PTA's financial reports, and I believe they warrant investigation." The officer on the other end hesitated. "Ma'am, do you have any concrete evidence of this?" Joanna smiled faintly, her voice lowering to a conspiratorial whisper. "I wouldn't be calling if I didn't. Let's just say I've seen enough to know something isn't right. And frankly, I'm concerned about the influence she's having on the students. I think it's in everyone's best interest if you looked into it." The officer promised to follow up, but Joanna knew her words carried weight. She had spent years cultivating relationships with the right people, from school board members to city officials. Her accusations would not be ignored, and she intended to ensure that Mia Watson's career at St. Mary's ended sooner rather than later. In her modest classroom, Mia stood at the whiteboard, explaining a new assignment to her students. The atmosphere was warm and engaging, with students actively participating in the discussion. Despite the challenges she faced outside these walls, Mia found solace in teaching. Here, she was in her element, inspiring young minds to think critically and challenge the status quo. As the lesson drew to a close, the classroom door swung open abruptly. 2 uniformed police officers stepped inside, their presence a jarring intrusion into the otherwise lively room. The students fell silent, their eyes darting between the officers and their teacher. "Miss Watson?" one of the officers asked, his voice firm but not unkind. Mia turned to face them, her brow furrowing in confusion. "Yes, that's me. How can I help you?" "We need you to come with us," the officer said, stepping forward. "You're under investigation for misappropriation of school funds." The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. Mia's heart raced as she tried to process what was happening. "There must be some mistake," she said, her voice steady despite the rising panic. "I've done nothing wrong." One of the students, a boy named Tyler, stood up from his desk. "What's going on? Miss Watson didn't do anything." "Sit down, Tyler," Mia said gently, her gaze softening. "It's okay." But it wasn't okay. As the officers placed handcuffs around her wrists, the gasps from her students cut through the silence. Kimberly, her star pupil, looked on in horror, her hand covering her mouth. In the back of the room, Adam Harper froze, his stomach churning with guilt. He couldn't shake the memory of his mother's words the night before, her thinly veiled disdain for Miss Watson. The officers led Mia out of the classroom, her dignity intact despite the humiliating scene. Students whispered among themselves, their shock quickly giving way to outrage. Many pulled out their phones, recording the incident as it unfolded. Outside the classroom, the hallways were abuzz with murmurs. Teachers peeked out of their rooms, their expressions a mixture of confusion and disbelief. As Mia was escorted through the front doors, Joanna Harper stood in the school's atrium, arms crossed and lips curled into a triumphant smirk. Her carefully orchestrated plan was unfolding exactly as she had envisioned. "Such a shame," she said loudly to no one in particular, "but I suppose justice has to be served." That evening, The videos of Mia's arrest spread like wildfire on social media. Students and parents alike shared their opinions, with some condemning the injustice and others siding with Joanna's narrative. The school administration released a carefully worded statement, distancing themselves from the situation while promising a thorough investigation. In her small apartment, Mia sat on the edge of her bed, her hands trembling as she scrolled through the barrage of messages on her phone. Some were supportive, others vicious. She felt the weight of the day pressing down on her, the humiliation of being arrested in front of her students still fresh in her mind. She replayed the scene over and over, searching for answers. Who could have done this? Why would someone go to such lengths to destroy her? Deep down, she knew the answer, though she didn't want to believe it. Joanna Harper had always been cold toward her, but this was personal. Across town, Adam sat in his room, staring at his textbooks but unable to focus. He had seen the fear in Miss Watson's eyes, the quiet dignity she maintained even as she was led away in handcuffs. His mother's words from earlier that evening echoed in his mind. "Well, it's about time they did something," Joanna had said during dinner, her voice filled with smug satisfaction. "People like her don't belong in places like St. Mary's." Adam clenched his fists, anger bubbling beneath the surface. He didn't know how, but he was certain his mother was involved. The thought made him feel sick. Miss Watson didn't deserve this. She had been nothing but kind to him, always encouraging him to believe in himself, to think critically and stand up for what was right. And yet, here he was, complicit in her downfall simply by remaining silent. The guilt gnawed at him, growing heavier with each passing hour. He knew he had to do something, but what could he, a 15-year-old boy, possibly do against the force of his mother's influence? As the town buzzed with speculation and outrage, the stage was set for a confrontation that would challenge everyone involved. Mia's quiet strength, Joanna's calculated malice, and Adam's growing resolve would collide in ways none of them could foresee. And though the battle ahead was far from over, one thing was certain: the truth would not remain buried for long. The days following Mia Watson's arrest unfolded like a nightmare. St. Mary's Academy, once a place of order and routine, was now awash with speculation. The polished marble halls buzzed with hushed conversations, a palpable tension filling the air. The administration scrambled to maintain control, but the incident had already spiraled beyond their grasp. Social media was flooded with videos of Mia being led out of her classroom, her composed expression a stark contrast to the chaos around her. For Mia, the aftermath was surreal. She had been released on bail, but the damage was done. Her name was plastered across headlines, and the weight of public scrutiny was crushing. Sitting in her small, sparsely decorated apartment, Mia stared at the stacks of books lining her shelves, symbols of her passion for teaching that now felt like relics of a distant life. She tried to distract herself by organizing her lesson plans, holding on to the faint hope that this nightmare would pass, and she could return to the classroom. But deep down, she knew it wasn't that simple. The accusations had cast a shadow over her career, and the silence from the school administration was deafening. She hadn't received a single call of support from her colleagues, and the principal's official statement had been as cold as it was impersonal. "Miss Watson is currently under investigation. We trust the authorities to conduct a thorough review and will act accordingly once the facts are clear," the statement read. Mia felt the words like a dagger to the chest. After years of dedication, this was her reward: a carefully crafted dismissal of her humanity, reducing her to a potential liability. She closed her laptop and leaned back on the couch, rubbing her temples. The fight ahead seemed insurmountable, but she refused to let despair consume her. There were students who believed in her, families who had seen her dedication. For their sake, if not her own, she had to persevere. At school, the climate was equally charged. The students were divided into two camps. Some, like Kimberly Parker, were furious and vocal about their support for Miss Watson. Kimberly had been leading informal meetings with other students, urging them to speak out. She had even started an online petition demanding Mia's reinstatement, which was quickly gaining signatures. "Miss Watson is the best teacher we've ever had," Kimberly said passionately during lunch, her voice rising above the chatter. "She's the reason half of us even care about literature. This whole thing is a setup, and we all know it." Others, however, were less convinced. The rumors swirling around the allegations, fueled by Joanna Harper and her circle of influence, painted a more sinister picture of Mia. Words like embezzlement and untrustworthy were whispered in the halls, spreading like a virus. Adam Harper found himself caught in the crossfire. At home, his mother was basking in the aftermath of her triumph, her smug demeanor a constant reminder of her role in Mia's downfall. "I'm just saying," Joanna remarked one evening over dinner, "this is exactly why we have to be careful about who we let into places like St. Mary's. Standards are important." Adam barely touched his food, his appetite soured by her words. He felt like a coward, his silence complicit in the injustice unfolding before him. Every time he saw Kimberly and the others advocating for Miss Watson, a pang of guilt twisted in his chest. He wanted to join them, to stand up for the teacher who had always believed in him, but the weight of his mother's authority was suffocating. One evening, as he sat in his room, Adam scrolled through the comments on Kimberly's petition. Many were supportive, but others were laced with venom. "She's a fraud," one comment read. "I always knew there was something off about her." "It's about time someone exposed her," said another. Adam clenched his fists, his mind racing. He couldn't sit idly by any longer. But what could he do? Confronting his mother seemed impossible. The thought of standing up to her icy glare made his stomach churn. Yet, as he thought of Miss Watson, the quiet dignity with which she had faced her arrest, the way she had always encouraged him to think for himself, he realized he couldn't let fear hold him back. Meanwhile, Kimberly's efforts were gaining momentum. She had managed to rally a group of students who were determined to clear Miss Watson's name. They spent their afternoons poring over school financial reports, searching for inconsistencies. Kimberly had even reached out to a local journalist, Jack Carter, whose recent article questioning the motives behind Mia's arrest had caught her attention. Jack was a seasoned reporter with a reputation for exposing corruption in small towns. When Kimberly contacted him, he was initially skeptical. Teenagers rarely had the kind of concrete evidence needed to build a compelling story. But as she laid out her case, the inconsistencies in the school's financial records, the suddenness of the allegations, and Joanna Harper's known influence, Jack's interest was piqued. "I can't promise anything," he told her during their first meeting at a local coffee shop, "but I'll look into it. If there's something here, we'll find it." Jack's investigation led him to dig deeper into Joanna Harper's history. What he uncovered painted a troubling picture. Over the years, Joanna had used her connections to manipulate school policies, ensuring her family maintained a position of power within the community. Multiple parents and teachers had raised concerns about her behavior, but their complaints had mysteriously disappeared. Jack's instincts told him Mia's case was no different. He began compiling evidence, interviewing parents and former staff members who had crossed paths with Joanna. The more he uncovered, the clearer it became that Mia was being targeted not because of any wrongdoing, but because of Joanna's personal vendetta. Mia, unaware of the growing support for her, spent her days meeting with her lawyer and trying to prepare for the legal battle ahead. Her lawyer, a sharp and compassionate woman named Elise Grant, had taken on the case pro bono after hearing about the circumstances. "This isn't just about clearing your name," Elise said during one of their meetings. "This is about exposing the system that allowed this to happen. We need to show that these accusations are baseless and motivated by prejudice." Mia nodded, though the weight of the task ahead felt overwhelming. She had always believed in the power of truth, but now she wasn't so sure. The world seemed stacked against her, the odds insurmountable. As the tension in the town reached a boiling point, Adam made a decision. Late one night, he crept into his mother's office, his heart pounding. He knew Joanna kept meticulous records of her dealings, and he hoped to find something, anything, that could help. As he rifled through her files, he stumbled upon an email exchange between Joanna and a member of the school board. The emails revealed Joanna's role in fabricating the accusations against Mia, using her influence to pressure the administration into compliance. Adam's hands trembled as he read the messages. The truth was worse than he had imagined. His mother hadn't just orchestrated Mia's downfall, she had manipulated the entire system to serve her agenda. The next morning, Adam walked into school with the evidence in hand. He sought out Kimberly, who was meeting with the group of students working to defend Mia. Handing her the printouts, he said simply, "You were right. She didn't do anything wrong." Kimberly looked at him, her eyes wide with surprise and gratitude. "Adam, this could change everything." As the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place, the students and Jack Carter prepared to expose the truth. The tide was turning, but the fight was far from over. Joanna Harper might have been the architect of this injustice, but she wasn't about to let her empire crumble without a fight. The evidence Adam had provided was a revelation. Kimberly sat in the corner of the library, hunched over a table with a group of her peers. The incriminating emails from Joanna Harper spread out before them. Each word was like a puzzle piece, coming together to reveal a disturbing picture of manipulation, lies, and power plays. Adam sat across from her, his face pale and tense. He had taken a monumental risk bringing these documents forward, and now the weight of his decision was beginning to sink in. Kimberly looked up at him, her voice quiet but firm. "Adam, this is huge. If we can prove these emails are real, Miss Watson's name can be cleared." Adam shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "I know, but this is my mom. If she finds out I took these, she'll kill me. She'll never forgive me." Kimberly placed a hand on his arm, her expression softening. "I know it's hard, but think about what she's done. She's destroyed Miss Watson's life just because she doesn't like her. That's not okay, Adam. You're doing the right thing." The room fell silent as the group processed the gravity of their mission. They weren't just fighting to save their teacher. They were taking on a powerful woman who had spent years manipulating the town's systems to her advantage. The stakes were higher than any of them had anticipated. Meanwhile, Jack Carter was deep into his investigation. The emails Adam had shared provided a crucial lead, and Jack wasted no time verifying their authenticity. He reached out to his sources on the school board, using his network of contacts to corroborate the claims. It didn't take long for him to uncover a pattern of behavior. Joanna Harper had a long history of wielding her influence to silence dissent and maintain her control over the school's policies. Jack's articles began to take shape. The first one laid out the broader context, highlighting the systemic issues at play in St. Mary's Academy. He carefully avoided naming Joanna directly, instead focusing on the culture of elitism and exclusion that permeated the town. The response was immediate. Parents and former teachers flooded his inbox with their own stories, many of which painted a damning picture of Joanna's reign over the school. But Jack knew that to truly expose the truth, he needed more than anecdotes. He needed someone who could stand up and tell their story on the record. His mind turned to Mia Watson. Mia was hesitant when Jack first reached out to her. The idea of speaking publicly about her ordeal was daunting. She had always preferred to let her work speak for itself, avoiding confrontation whenever possible. But as Jack explained the evidence he had gathered and the growing support among the students, a flicker of hope began to take root. "They believe in you, Mia," Jack said, his voice steady. "Your students are fighting for you. They're taking risks, going against their own families because they know this is wrong. You have the chance to stand up not just for yourself, but for everyone who's been silenced by people like Joanna Harper." Mia nodded slowly, her mind racing. She thought of her students, their faces etched with worry and determination. She thought of Kimberly, who had always been a force of nature in the classroom, and Adam, who had found the courage to defy his mother. They deserved better. They deserved a teacher who wouldn't back down in the face of injustice. "I'll do it," she said finally, her voice quiet but resolute. "Let's tell the truth." As Jack prepared Mia's interview, Kimberly and the other students took their activism to the next level. They organized a sit-in at the school, gathering in the main atrium with signs and banners demanding justice for Miss Watson. The protest quickly gained traction, drawing the attention of local media and amplifying their message. Kimberly stood at the center of the crowd, her voice ringing out with conviction. "This isn't just about Miss Watson. This is about standing up to a system that allows people like Joanna Harper to control our lives. We won't be silenced." The protest was a turning point. Parents who had initially sided with Joanna began to question their allegiance, while others came forward with their own grievances. The school administration, caught off guard by the intensity of the backlash, scrambled to address the situation. Principal Garrett called an emergency meeting with the PTA, desperate to find a way to restore order. Joanna Harper, however, was unshaken. She attended the meeting with her usual air of confidence, dismissing the protests as the antics of unruly children. "This will blow over," she said coolly. "They're just kids. They don't understand how the world works." But beneath her calm exterior, Joanna was rattled. The emails Adam had taken were a ticking time bomb, and she knew it. She began making calls, reaching out to her allies on the school board and in the community, trying to contain the fallout. For the first time in years, her control over St. Mary's was slipping. Adam watched his mother's descent with a mixture of guilt and resolve. He knew he had done the right thing, but the sight of her unraveling was difficult to bear. At home, the tension was palpable. Joanna's sharp remarks and icy glares only deepened the rift between them. One evening, as they sat in the living room, she turned to him with a piercing look. "Do you know anything about those emails, Adam?" she asked, her tone deceptively casual. Adam hesitated, his heart pounding. "No," he lied, avoiding her gaze. Joanna studied him for a moment, her eyes narrowing. "If I find out you've been involved in this rebellion, there will be consequences. Do you understand me?" Adam nodded, his throat dry. He had never felt so alone. caught between loyalty to his mother and his growing sense of justice. But as he lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling, he reminded himself why he had made his choice. Miss Watson had always believed in him, even when he didn't believe in himself. He couldn't let her down. The day Jack's article featuring Mia's story was published, the town was turned upside down. The piece was a powerful indictment of the systemic issues at St. Mary's, and Mia's voice shone through as a beacon of resilience and hope. She spoke of her love for teaching, the challenges she had faced as the school's first black teacher, and her determination to continue fighting for her students. The article was accompanied by the emails Adam had provided, which Jack had verified with multiple sources. The evidence was undeniable, and the backlash was swift. Parents demanded Joanna's resignation from the PTA, while students rallied behind Mia with renewed fervor. The administration, facing mounting pressure, announced an independent investigation into the allegations against her. For the first time in weeks, Mia felt a glimmer of hope. The tide was turning, and the truth was finally coming to light. But the battle was far from over. Joanna Harper was not the type to go down without a fight, and Mia knew there were still obstacles to overcome. As she prepared for the next phase of the struggle, she drew strength from the people who had stood by her, the students who had refused to stay silent, the journalist who had risked his reputation to tell her story, and the quiet resolve she had carried within her all along. The fight for justice had only just begun. The publication of Jack Carter's article shook the foundations of St. Mary's Academy and the wider Hartford community. The exposé, paired with Mia Watson's heartfelt testimony and the damning emails that implicated Joanna Harper, ignited a firestorm of outrage. Conversations erupted in every corner of the town, at kitchen tables, in coffee shops, and in the hallways of the school. The carefully constructed image of perfection that Joanna had built for herself began to crumble. For Mia, the days that followed were a whirlwind of emotions. She had expected backlash, perhaps even more vitriol, but what surprised her was the overwhelming wave of support. Former students reached out with messages of encouragement. Parents expressed their anger at the administration's handling of the situation, and the online petition Kimberly had started now had thousands of signatures. Mia sat in her apartment, reading through the comments on the article. One particularly stood out. Miss Watson was the best teacher I ever had. She taught me to think for myself and believe in my potential. Hartford doesn't deserve her. She felt a lump in her throat as she realized that, despite everything, she had made an impact. But the fight wasn't over yet. At school, the atmosphere was electric. Kimberly and her group of student activists were more determined than ever. Armed with the revelations from Jack's article, they planned a major protest to demand justice for Mia. The sit-in they had organized earlier was only the beginning. This time, they wanted the entire town to hear their voices. In the midst of the planning, Adam Harper found himself in unfamiliar territory. Once hesitant and unsure, he was now fully committed to the cause. The guilt he carried for his mother's actions had transformed into a quiet resolve. He spent hours with Kimberly and the others, brainstorming slogans, creating banners, and strategizing the protest. Though he still avoided speaking publicly, his presence was enough to inspire others. "Adam," Kimberly said one afternoon as they worked on posters in the library, "you've been amazing through all of this. I know it hasn't been easy for you." Adam shrugged, his cheeks flushing slightly. "It's the least I can do. I wish I'd spoken up sooner." Kimberly smiled. "You're here now. That's what matters." Joanna Harper, meanwhile, was in full damage control mode. Her carefully constructed world was unraveling, and she was determined to salvage what she could. She spent hours on the phone with her allies, trying to discredit the article and downplay the significance of the emails. But her usual tactics were failing. The weight of evidence against her was too great, and her influence over the school board was waning. At home, the tension between Joanna and Adam reached a boiling point. One evening, as they sat in the dining room, Joanna slammed her glass onto the table, her face flushed with anger. "Do you have any idea what this is doing to our family?" she snapped, glaring at Adam. "Your name is being dragged through the mud because of that woman." Adam met her gaze, his voice steady. "No, Mom. Our name is being dragged through the mud because of you." Joanna's eyes narrowed. "Watch your tone, young man." "No," Adam said, his voice growing louder. "You lied. You set her up because you couldn't handle the fact that she's a better person than you'll ever be. And now everyone knows it." Joanna rose from her chair, her hands trembling. "You don't know what you're talking about." "Yes, I do," Adam shot back. "I've seen the emails. I know what you did." The silence that followed was deafening. Joanna's face hardened, but Adam didn't back down. For the first time in his life, he saw her for who she truly was. A woman so consumed by her own prejudices and insecurities that she would destroy anyone who threatened her illusion of control. The day of the protest arrived, and the energy in the air was palpable. Hundreds of students gathered outside the school, holding signs that read, "Justice for Miss Watson," "Stop the Lies," and "Equality for All." Parents and community members joined them, their voices adding to the chorus of demands for change. Local news crews covered the event, broadcasting the protest to a wider audience. Kimberly stood at the front of the crowd, her voice amplified by a megaphone. "This isn't just about Miss Watson," she declared, her words carrying over the sea of faces. "This is about standing up to a system that has allowed people like Joanna Harper to abuse their power for far too long. We won't be silent anymore." The crowd erupted into cheers, their voices echoing through the streets. Adam stood nearby, holding a sign of his own. Though he remained quiet, the determination in his eyes spoke volumes. Inside the school, Principal Garrett watched the scene unfold from his office window. The pressure was mounting, and he knew he couldn't ignore it any longer. He called an emergency meeting with the school board where the decision was made to suspend Joanna from her position on the PTA pending further investigation. Later that evening, Jack Carter published a follow-up article detailing the protest and the school board's decision. The piece included interviews with students and parents, as well as a statement from Mia herself. "I am overwhelmed by the support I've received," Mia said in the article. "This fight isn't just about me. It's about ensuring that no one else has to go through what I've experienced. I'm proud of my students for standing up for what's right, and I'm hopeful that this is the beginning of real change." The article went viral, drawing attention from national media outlets. Mia's story resonated far beyond Hartford, sparking discussions about systemic racism and the power of grassroots activism. For the first time in weeks, Mia felt a sense of hope. The truth was finally coming to light, and the tide was turning in her favor. Joanna, however, was far from defeated. Though her influence had diminished, she was determined to fight back. She hired a high-profile attorney and began preparing her defense, framing herself as the victim of a witch hunt. But her usual bravado was undermined by the growing evidence against her, and even her closest allies began to distance themselves. Adam watched his mother's efforts with a mix of sadness and resolve. He knew she would never admit her wrongdoing, but he also knew that her reign of terror was coming to an end. For the first time in his life, he felt free. As the community rallied around Mia, the pieces of the puzzle continued to fall into place. The fight wasn't over, but the momentum was on their side. Justice was within reach, and the students, parents, and teachers who had stood together knew that their voices had made a difference. The battle was far from over, but the cracks in the system were widening, and the truth was finally breaking through. The courthouse steps were alive with a crowd that buzzed with tension and anticipation. Parents, students, and reporters gathered in clusters, their conversations drowned out by the click of cameras and the low hum of news vans parked along the curb. Mia Watson, dressed in a simple yet elegant navy blue blazer, ascended the steps with her lawyer, Elise Grant, by her side. She felt the weight of every eye on her, but she held her head high. This wasn't just a trial. It was a reckoning. Joanna Harper arrived minutes later, flanked by her high-profile attorney and a handful of supporters from her dwindling social circle. Her expression was calm, almost defiant, but there was a flicker of unease in her eyes. She scanned the crowd and caught sight of her son, Adam, standing near the front with a group of students holding signs that read, "Justice for Miss Watson." His gaze didn't falter when it met hers, and for the first time she felt the sting of isolation. Inside the courthouse, the air was heavy with the significance of what was about to unfold. The trial wasn't a formal criminal proceeding, but a hearing that would determine the validity of the allegations against Mia and address the mounting evidence of Joanna's misconduct. It was a public forum where the truth would finally come to light. The first day of the trial was dominated by opening statements. Joanna's lawyer painted her as a concerned parent who had simply raised legitimate concerns about the school's financial management. He framed her actions as those of a civic-minded individual who had been unfairly vilified. Mia's lawyer, Elise, countered with a compelling narrative that highlighted Joanna's history of manipulation and the systemic biases that had allowed her to exert undue influence over the school. Elise's voice was calm yet firm as she addressed the court. This case is not just about clearing Miss Watson's name. It is about exposing a pattern of behavior that has gone unchecked for far too long. My client has dedicated her life to educating and inspiring her students only to have her reputation dragged through the mud by baseless accusations. The next day, the evidence began to flow. Elise presented the emails Adam had uncovered, walking the court through each incriminating message. The timeline was clear. Joanna had fabricated the allegations against Mia, pressured the school board into compliance, and used her position to control the narrative. As Elise laid out the evidence, murmurs rippled through the courtroom. The weight of the truth was undeniable, and the cracks in Joanna's defense began to show. Her lawyer attempted to discredit the emails, suggesting they had been taken out of context, but the sheer volume of evidence made it impossible to deny the deliberate nature of her actions. The turning point came when Adam took the stand. His testimony was a mix of nervousness and quiet determination. As he recounted the events leading up to Mia's arrest, his voice wavered but never broke. "I found the emails in my mom's office," he said, his hands gripping the edges of the witness stand. "At first, I didn't want to believe it, but as I read through them, it became clear that she set up Miss Watson. She didn't want her teaching at St. Mary's." Joanna's lawyer tried to rattle him with pointed questions, but Adam remained steadfast. When asked why he had chosen to come forward, he looked directly at Mia and said, "Because it was the right thing to do. Miss Watson taught me to stand up for what's right, even when it's hard." Tears welled in Mia's eyes, and a wave of emotion swept through the courtroom. Adam's testimony was a powerful moment, one that solidified the truth in the minds of everyone present. The next witness was Kimberly Parker, who spoke about the impact Mia had on her and her classmates. "Miss Watson made us believe in ourselves," Kimberly said, her voice clear and passionate. "She taught us that we could change the world if we worked together. That's why we're all here, to fight for her, the way she's always fought for us." The students in the courtroom nodded in agreement, their presence a testament to Mia's influence. Even Principal Garrett, who had been notably silent throughout the ordeal, took the stand to acknowledge the systemic issues that had allowed the situation to escalate. Though his words were measured, they signaled a shift in the school's stance and a tacit acknowledgement of its failures. Joanna's defense began to unravel as more evidence and testimonies mounted against her. Her lawyer struggled to maintain composure as he cross-examined witnesses, but the momentum had shifted irrevocably. Joanna herself took the stand, attempting to portray herself as a victim of public persecution. She spoke of her dedication to her son and her desire to protect the school's reputation, but her words rang hollow. Under cross-examination, Elise skillfully dismantled Joanna's narrative, highlighting the inconsistencies in her story and forcing her to confront the evidence against her. The more Joanna tried to justify her actions, the more transparent her motives became. "Mrs. Harper," Elise said, her tone unwavering, "isn't it true that your actions were motivated not by concern for the school, but by personal animosity toward Miss Watson?" Joanna hesitated, her composure faltering for the first time. I was protecting my son," she stammered. "I didn't want him exposed to ideas that could confuse him." "Or perhaps," Elise pressed, "you simply couldn't tolerate the idea of a black teacher excelling at St. Mary's." The room fell silent, the weight of the accusation hanging in the air. Joanna's face flushed, but she didn't respond. The final day of the trial was marked by closing arguments. Elise delivered a powerful summation that left no doubt about the truth. This case is about more than one teacher or one parent. It is about a community that must confront its own prejudices and choose a better path. Miss Watson has shown us what it means to lead with integrity and compassion. It's time for us to stand with her. The judge's decision came swiftly. The allegations against Mia were dismissed, and the court ruled that Joanna Harper had acted with malicious intent. Though she avoided criminal charges, her reputation was irreparably damaged, and she was removed from her position on the PTA. Outside the courthouse, the crowd erupted into cheers as Mia emerged, her head held high. Students and parents surrounded her, their voices a chorus of support and gratitude. Adam approached her hesitantly, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. "I'm so sorry for everything," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Mia placed a hand on his shoulder, her expression warm. "You did the right thing, Adam. That's what matters." As the crowd began to disperse, Mia felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in weeks. The battle had been hard fought, but justice had prevailed, and while the scars of the ordeal would remain, she knew she had the strength to move forward. For St. Mary's, the trial was a wake-up call. Conversations about equity and inclusion began to take root, driven by the students who had refused to stay silent. And, for Mia, the experience reaffirmed her belief in the power of truth and the resilience of the human spirit. The fight was over, but the work was just beginning. The days following the trial were a blur of emotions for Mia Watson. Relief, gratitude, and a lingering exhaustion blended together as she began to process what had happened. She had won. Her name was cleared, and the truth about Joanna Harper's deceit had been exposed. Yet, even as she stood in the sunlight of this newfound justice, the shadows of the experience lingered. Returning to her classroom at St. Mary's was a moment Mia would never forget. The familiar sight of desks arranged in neat rows, the faint scent of old books, and the sunlight streaming through the windows brought a lump to her throat. For weeks, she had feared she would never see this room again. But as she set down her bag and looked around, she realized that everything had changed. Not the room itself, but what it represented. Her first day back was met with a mixture of quiet celebration and cautious optimism. Kimberly and several other students had decorated the classroom with handmade banners reading, "Welcome back, Miss Watson," and "We missed you." The sight made Mia laugh and cry in equal measure. The students clapped and cheered when she entered, their enthusiasm a testament to the bond they shared. Mia spent the first part of the lesson thanking them. "You all stood up for what's right," she said, her voice steady but thick with emotion. "You didn't just fight for me. You fought for fairness, for justice. And that's something no one can ever take away from you." Kimberly raised her hand. "We couldn't have done it without you, Miss Watson. You're the reason we know how to fight in the first place." The room filled with murmurs of agreement, and Mia smiled, her heart full. For the first time in weeks, she felt a sense of hope, not just for herself, but for her students and the community as a whole. Outside the classroom, the school was still grappling with the aftermath of the trial. Principal Garrett had called for a series of town hall meetings to address the systemic issues that had come to light. The administration, once complicit in turning a blind eye, now found itself at the center of a reckoning. Parents, teachers, and students filled the school auditorium for the first meeting. Mia sat near the back, observing as the conversations unfolded. At the front of the room, Principal Garrett addressed the crowd with a mix of humility and determination. "We failed Miss Watson," he began, his voice echoing in the vast space. "And in doing so, we failed our students and our community. This school has long prided itself on its excellence, but excellence means nothing if it isn't built on a foundation of equity and respect." The meeting was a turning point for the school. Policies were reviewed, biases confronted, and new initiatives introduced to foster a more inclusive environment. Mia was invited to join a committee focused on creating programs that celebrated diversity and encouraged open dialogue among students and staff. Though hesitant at first, she agreed, knowing that the work ahead was as important as the battle she had just fought. For Joanna Harper, the aftermath of the trial was a stark contrast. Her once unshakable position of influence had crumbled, leaving her isolated and ostracized. Her allies had distanced themselves, and her removal from the PTA marked the end of her dominance at St. Mary's. Even her personal life had been affected. Her husband, long weary of her controlling ways, had filed for divorce. Joanna's relationship with Adam was perhaps the most strained. In the weeks following the trial, their conversations had been brief and tense, often punctuated by silence. Adam, who had found his voice during the ordeal, no longer looked at his mother with the same mixture of reverence and fear. Instead, he saw her as a cautionary tale, a reminder of what unchecked prejudice and power could do. One evening, as they sat in the living room, Joanna finally broke the silence. "I suppose you think I got what I deserved," she said, her voice brittle. Adam didn't respond immediately, and when he did, his tone was calm but firm. "I think you need to figure out why you did what you did, and I think you need to apologize to Miss Watson." Joanna scoffed, but there was a trace of vulnerability in her expression. "You have no idea what it's like to lose everything." "Neither did Miss Watson," Adam said, standing up. but she never let it turn her into someone like you." His words lingered in the air as he walked out of the room, leaving Joanna alone with her thoughts. For the first time, she began to see the cracks in the facade she had built, though whether she would confront them remained uncertain. Adam, on the other hand, had grown in ways he never thought possible. His decision to come forward during the trial had been a turning point, and the support he received from his peers and Miss Watson gave him the confidence to continue standing up for what he believed in. He began volunteering with the new diversity committee, working alongside Mia and other students to create programs that fostered understanding and empathy. One afternoon, as he stayed after school to help plan an upcoming event, Mia approached him. "Adam," she said, her voice warm, "I just wanted to say how proud I am of you. What you did wasn't easy, but it made all the difference." Adam smiled, a hint of shyness in his expression. I couldn't let her get away with it. Not after everything she did to you." "You did more than that," Mia said. "You showed your classmates and your community that standing up for what's right is always worth it." The two shared a quiet moment of understanding, the weight of the past week settling into something lighter, something hopeful. As the school year progressed, the changes at St. Mary's became more apparent. Students felt empowered to voice their concerns, and teachers began incorporating lessons on social justice and cultural awareness into their curriculums. The community, once divided, began to heal, though the scars of the ordeal remained a reminder of the work still to be done. For Mia, each day in the classroom was a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. She saw it in the way Kimberly led discussions with newfound confidence, in the way Adam helped bridge divides among his peers, and in the way the students rallied around one another. One afternoon, as the final bell rang, Mia stood at her desk, watching her students file out. Kimberly lingered behind, a thoughtful expression on her face. "Miss Watson," she said, "do you think things will really change?" Mia considered the question, her gaze drifting to the sunlight streaming through the window. "Change isn't easy," she said finally, "and it doesn't happen overnight. But I believe in you, in all of you. If anyone can make it happen, it's this generation." Kimberly nodded, a small smile forming on her lips. "Then I guess we've got work to do." As the classroom emptied, Mia felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in months. The road ahead was long, but it was one she was ready to walk. For the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to dream, not just for herself, but for her students, her community, and the world they were striving to build. The past had tested her, but the future was hers to shape. And as Mia locked the door behind her and stepped into the fading light of the day, she knew she wasn't walking it alone. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this story and want to see more like it, make sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss our next video. Share this video with friends and family to spread the message, and don't forget to check out our other videos for more thought-provoking stories. See you next time.